He built an empire on steel and silence, but the loneliest man in the world was about to meet the only woman who saw straight through him. Alexander Harrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, 57 stories above the city, that whispered his name with equal parts reverence and fear. At 34, he'd turned his father's failing construction company into a global empire worth $8 billion. He owned hotels in Dubai, towers in Singapore, entire blocks of Manhattan. But tonight, staring at his reflection in the glass, all he saw was a stranger. His phone buzzed. Another message from Victoria, the socialite his board wanted him to marry. Dinner at Le Bernardin? We should be seen together before the Forbes interview. He didn't reply. Behind him, the penthouse stretched like a museum, marble, gold, emptiness. Everything perfectly curated. Nothing truly his. His assistant's words from earlier still echoed. "Sir, she said yes to the prenup. She's perfect for your image." Perfect for his image. Alexander closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt something crack inside his chest. Not pain exactly, but an ache so deep it had no name. He thought of his father's funeral 3 months ago. Hundreds of people attended. Business partners, investors, competitors wearing black and fake sympathy. But when they lowered the casket, Alexander realized something that haunted him ever since. Not a single person there actually loved the man. They loved his money, his power, his name. And Alexander was becoming exactly the same ghost. Stay until the end. This story will change how you see love. And before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. 3 weeks later, Alexander did something no one, not his lawyers, not his board, not even his closest confidant, could have predicted. He disappeared. Not dramatically, not publicly. He simply stepped away. He withdrew cash, bought clothes from a thrift store, and checked into a small room above a mechanic's shop on the east side of the city, the kind of neighborhood where Maseratis didn't park and CEOs didn't exist. He told himself it was an experiment, a test. I just need to know if it's possible, if someone could see me, really see me, without the billion-dollar filter. He became Alex, no last name, no history, just a guy who paid rent in cash and said he was between jobs. The first week was humbling. The second week was humiliating. By the third week, he'd learned how to unclog a drain, carry groceries up 4 flights of stairs, and nod politely when the landlady complained about the water pressure. He was invisible. And for the first time in a decade, he could breathe. It was a Thursday morning when he first saw her. The cafe on the corner, Rosie's, was the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and cinnamon, where the chairs didn't match and the Wi-Fi barely worked. Alexander had been going there every morning, ordering black coffee and sitting by the window, watching the world move without him. She came in like sunlight breaking through clouds. Not because she was beautiful, though she was in an unassuming earth and honey kind of way, but because of the way she moved, gentle, present, like she wasn't rushing towards something better, but fully living in the moment she was in. She wore a faded yellow sweater, jeans with a small tear at the knee, and her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun that somehow made her look both younger and wiser than she probably was. She ordered tea, chamomile, no sugar, and when Rosie, the owner, asked how she was, she smiled and said, "Surviving, but surviving with gratitude, so that's something." Rosie laughed. "That's my girl." The woman took a seat 2 tables away from Alexander, pulled out a worn paperback and began to read. He tried not to stare. He failed. There was something about her, something quiet and whole, that made the noise in his head go still. She didn't check her phone, didn't glance around for validation. She just existed peacefully, like someone who'd made peace with herself a long time ago. Alexander didn't realize he'd been staring until she looked up. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world paused. Her gaze was warm, curious, unguarded in a way that startled him. She didn't look away, didn't smile politely and retreat. She just held his gaze, tilted her head slightly, and then, so softly it almost wasn't there, she smiled. Not a flirtatious smile, not a practiced one, just kind. Alexander's throat tightened. He looked down quickly, heat rising to his face like a teenager caught staring. "Get it together," he told himself. But when he glanced back up, she was still watching him, not with suspicion, but with something gentler, something like recognition. She stood, walked over, and stopped at the edge of his table. "You've been coming here every morning for 3 weeks," she said quietly. Her voice was softer than he expected, like velvet over stone. "But you never talked to anyone." Alexander blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't think anyone noticed." "I notice a lot of things." She paused, then gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Mind if I sit?" He should have said no, should have kept the distance, kept the experiment clean. But instead he heard himself say, "Please." She sat down, folded her hands on the table, and studied him with those calm, searching eyes. "You look strong," she said softly, "but your eyes say otherwise." Alexander's breath caught. No one had ever said anything like that to him, not in boardrooms, not at galas, not in 12 years of building an empire. "I'm Emma," she said, extending her hand. He took it. Her hand was small, warm, and calloused in a way that spoke of real work. "Alex?" he said. "Just Alex?" "Just Alex." She smiled again, this time with a hint of knowing. "Okay, just Alex. Tell me something true." He frowned. "What?" "Something true," she repeated gently. "Not a fact. Not small talk. Something true." Alexander stared at her, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years, and before he could stop himself, the truth spilled out. "I don't think anyone has ever really loved me." The words hung in the air between them, raw, vulnerable, impossible to take back. Emma didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't offer empty reassurance. She just nodded slowly, her eyes soft with understanding. "Then I'm glad I sat down," she whispered. And that was the moment everything changed. Emma didn't leave after that first conversation. She stayed for another hour, and they talked, not about jobs or accomplishments or where they went to school, but about things that mattered in ways Alexander had forgotten were possible. She told him about the community center, where she volunteered 3 times a week, teaching art to kids who couldn't afford supplies. She told him about her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who was 83 and still made dumplings from scratch every Sunday. She told him about the stray cat that lived behind the building, how she'd been leaving food out for 2 months, earning its trust 1 meal at a time. "You can't rush trust," she said simply. "It comes when it's ready." Alexander listened like a man hearing music for the first time. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the edge of the table. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "I'll be here," he said. And he was. Over the next 2 weeks, their morning coffees became a ritual. Emma would arrive at 8:15, order her chamomile tea, and sit across from him with that same peaceful presence that made the rest of the world feel less sharp. They talked about books, about childhood dreams, about the small, strange beauty of ordinary life. But the more time Alexander spent with her, the more the two halves of his existence began to war inside him. Because Emma didn't just talk, she lived differently. One morning she brought him a scarf she'd knitted. "It's getting colder," she said, handing it to him like it was the most natural thing in the world. "And you always look freezing in that thin jacket." Alexander stared at the scarf, forest green, slightly uneven, clearly handmade, and felt something twist in his chest. "You made this?" "It's not perfect," she said with a small laugh. "But it's warm." That's what matters, right? He couldn't remember the last time someone had given him something that wasn't transactional, something that didn't come with an agenda or an invoice. "Thank you," he said quietly, wrapping it around his neck. She smiled. "It looks good on you." He wore it every day after that, but the clash came inevitably in the way they saw the world. One afternoon, Emma convinced him to walk with her to the community center. "I want to show you something," she said. The center was a converted warehouse on the south side, paint peeling, windows cracked, but inside it was alive with color and laughter. Kids ran between tables covered in paint and clay. A teenager played guitar in the corner. An elderly woman taught a young mother how to crochet. Emma moved through the space like she belonged to it, greeting everyone by name, crouching down to admire a child's painting, helping a boy fix a broken easel. Alexander stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, feeling absurdly out of place. She turned back to him, smiling. "Come on, don't just stand there." He followed her to a table where a little girl, no more than 7, was staring at a blank canvas with fierce concentration. "This is Lily," Emma said. "Lily? This is my friend Alex." Lily looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "Do you know how to paint?" "No," Alexander admitted. "Me neither," Lily said matter-of-factly. "But Miss Emma says it's not about being good. It's about being brave." Emma handed him a brush. "Go on. Be brave." Alexander stared at the brush like it was a foreign object. He'd signed billion-dollar contracts, negotiated mergers that moved markets, stood in front of shareholders, and commanded rooms with a single word. But holding a paintbrush next to a 7-year-old girl terrified him. He dipped it in blue paint and made a single, hesitant stroke across the canvas. Lily giggled. "That's good. Keep going." And so he did. For the next hour, Alexander Harrington, CEO, billionaire, ghost, painted alongside a child and felt more human than he had in a decade. Later, as they walked back through the streets at dusk, Emma turned to him. "You were different in there," she said softly. "Different how?" "Lighter." She smiled. "Like you forgot to be whoever you usually are." Alexander's jaw tightened. "If only you knew." "What do you think I usually am?" he asked carefully. Emma stopped walking. She turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his. "I think you're someone who's been hurt," she said quietly. "I think you've built walls so high, you forgot what it's like to let someone in. And I think..." She hesitated. "I think you're tired of pretending you're okay." Alexander's heart slammed against his ribs. "You don't know me, Emma." "No," she agreed. "But I'd like to." The vulnerability in her voice nearly undid him. He wanted to tell her everything. Wanted to rip the mask off and show her the truth, the towers, the empire, the loneliness that ate him alive in rooms full of people. But he couldn't, because if he told her, everything would change. She'd look at him differently, talk to him differently. The simplicity, the realness of this would shatter. So instead he said, "I'm not who you think I am." Emma tilted her head, studying him. "I don't think you're anyone, Alex. I just think you're you, and that's enough." He looked away, throat tight. "What if it's not?" he whispered. Emma reached out and gently touched his arm. "Then we'll figure it out together." But the worlds kept colliding. A few days later, they were walking past a luxury car dealership when Emma stopped to stare at a sleek black Aston Martin in the window. "That's beautiful," she murmured. "You like cars?" Alexander asked. She laughed softly. "I like the idea of them, but I'll never own one. I take the bus. It's cheaper, and honestly, I like watching people. You see the whole world on a bus." Alexander said nothing. He owned 4 cars. 5, if you counted the vintage Porsche in storage. "What about you?" Emma asked, turning to him. "If you could have any car, what would you choose?" "I don't know," he lied. "I've never really thought about it." Emma smiled. "That's because you're not materialistic. I like that about you." The guilt settled like a stone in his stomach. That night, Alexander sat alone in his rented room above the mechanic's shop, staring at his phone. 73 missed calls, 112 emails. His lawyer, his assistant, his board members, all wondering where the hell he was. One message from his CFO stood out. "Alex, we need you back. The Singapore deal is falling apart. If you don't return by Monday, we lose $400 million. $400 million. It used to be a number that mattered. Now, it felt like noise. He thought of Emma's smile, the scarf she'd knitted, the way she looked at him like he was worth knowing, not because of what he had, but because of who he was, or who he was pretending to be. He closed his eyes. "What am I doing?" He didn't have an answer. The next morning, Emma wasn't at the cafe. Alexander waited for an hour, worry creeping up his spine. Finally, Rosie came over with his coffee. "She's not coming today, hun. Her mom's in the hospital." His blood went cold. "What happened?" "Pneumonia. Emma's been at the hospital since last night." Rosie sighed. "That girl works herself to the bone taking care of everyone else. I just hope someone's taking care of her." Alexander stood abruptly. "Which hospital?" "St. Mary's, but..." He was already out the door. He found her in the waiting room on the 4th floor, curled up in a plastic chair, her head resting against the wall. Her eyes were red, her face pale with exhaustion. When she saw him, her expression crumbled. "Alex." He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt in front of her. "I'm here," he said quietly. Emma's lip trembled. "I didn't know who to call." "You don't need to call anyone," he said. "I'm here." And then, for the first time since he'd met her, Emma broke. She leaned forward, and Alexander wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried, soft, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and scared. "She's all I have," Emma whispered against his shoulder. "If I lose her..." "You won't," Alexander said firmly. "I won't let you." She pulled back, looking at him with red-rimmed eyes. "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted, "but I can promise I'll be here no matter what." Emma searched his face, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes, something like hope. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" Alexander's throat closed. "Because you're the first real thing I've felt in 10 years. Because you see me, really see me, and don't want anything in return. Because I'm falling in love with you, and it's the most terrifying thing I've ever done." But he couldn't say any of that. So instead, he said simply, "Because you matter, Emma. You matter more than you know." But love had other plans. Emma's mother recovered. It took 6 days of antibiotics, sleepless nights, and more fear than Emma wanted to admit, but she recovered. Alexander stayed through all of it. He brought coffee at 3 a.m. He sat with Emma in waiting rooms that smelled like disinfectant and despair. He learned the names of nurses and doctors. He held Emma's hand when she was too tired to speak. And when her mother finally opened her eyes and smiled weakly at her daughter, Alexander stood in the doorway and watched Emma cry tears of relief and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This is what matters, he thought, not empires, not deals. This. A week later, Emma invited him to Sunday dinner. "My mum wants to meet you," she said almost shyly. "She keeps saying she needs to thank the man who stayed with her daughter through the worst of it." Alexander's chest tightened. "You don't have to." "I want to," Emma interrupted gently. "Please, Alex, come." He couldn't say no to her. Emma's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The paint was chipped, the hallway dim, but when she opened the door, warmth spilled out. The scent of garlic and herbs, the sound of soft music playing from an old radio. "Come in," Emma said, smiling. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, a living room with a couch that sagged in the middle. But it was alive, photos on every surface, plants on the windowsill, handmade quilts draped over chairs. It was a home. Alexander hadn't realized how much he'd missed the feeling of a real home until he stepped inside. Emma's mother, Grace, sat in a chair by the window, wrapped in blankets despite the warmth. She was thin, fragile, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "So you're Alex," Grace said, her voice raspy but warm. "Yes, ma'am," Alexander said, suddenly feeling like a boy meeting his girlfriend's parents for the first time. Girlfriend. The word caught him off guard. Grace studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Thank you for taking care of my girl." "She doesn't need much taking care of," Alexander said softly. "She's stronger than anyone I've ever met." Grace's smile widened. "She gets that from me." Emma laughed, blushing. "Mum, stop. I'm just saying what's true." Dinner was simple: roasted chicken, vegetables, rice. But it was the best meal Alexander had eaten in years. Not because of the food, though it was good, but because of the way Emma and her mother moved around each other with practiced ease, the way they laughed at inside jokes, the way Grace looked at her daughter like she was the sun itself. "Emma tells me you're between jobs," Grace said, passing him more rice. Alexander nodded carefully. "I'm figuring some things out." "That's brave," Grace said. "Most people are too afraid to pause and ask themselves what they really want." Alexander glanced at Emma, who was watching him with soft eyes. "I'm learning," he said quietly. After dinner, Emma walked him to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It meant a lot to her, to me." "Thank you for inviting me," Alexander said. "Your mum is wonderful." "She likes you," Emma smiled. "She said you have sad eyes but a good heart." Alexander's throat tightened. "She's perceptive." "She is." Emma hesitated, then reached out and took his hand. "Alex, I know you're carrying something heavy. And I don't need you to tell me what it is, but I want you to know you don't have to carry it alone." He looked down at their joined hands. He wanted to tell her. God, he wanted to tell her everything, but the words stuck in his throat, held back by fear and shame and the terrible certainty that once she knew the truth, this fragile, beautiful thing between them would shatter. "Emma, She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "You don't have to say anything. Just don't disappear on me, okay?" "I won't," he whispered. She smiled, stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, soft, brief, but enough to stop his heart. "Good night, Alex." "Good night." But the universe had other plans. 2 days later, Alexander was walking through the neighborhood when he saw it. A notice taped to the door of the community center. "Building sold, eviction." Notice, 30 days to vacate. His blood ran cold. He pulled out his phone and made a call he'd been avoiding for weeks. "Marcus," he said when his lawyer answered, "I need information on a property, East Side, 4th and Lehman." Marcus hesitated. "Alex, where the hell have you been? We've been—" "Just get me the information." 20 minutes later, Marcus called back. "The building was sold 3 weeks ago to Garrison Development. They're demolishing it to build luxury condos." Alexander's jaw clenched. "Who owns Garrison?" "Technically, a shell corp. But the money traces back to—" Marcus paused. "Your company, Alex. Harrington Global. It's one of your subsidiary projects." The phone nearly slipped from Alexander's hand. His company was tearing down the community center. He was destroying the place that mattered most to Emma. That evening, Emma found him sitting on the steps outside her building, his head in his hands. "Alex?" She sat down beside him, concern flooding her face. "What's wrong?" He couldn't look at her. "The community center," he said hoarsely. "It's being torn down." Emma's face went pale. "What?" "Sold to developers, 30 days. For a long moment, Emma said nothing. Then she whispered, "Those kids. That's the only safe place some of them have." Alexander's hands curled into fists. "I know." "We have to do something," Emma said, her voice gaining strength. "We'll fight it. We'll organize. Emma." He finally looked at her, and the devastation in his eyes stopped her cold. "You can't fight this." "Why not?" "Because the people who bought it, they're too powerful, too connected. They'll win." Emma stared at him, something shifting in her expression. "You sound like you know them." His heart hammered. "I just know how these things work." "No." Emma stood, her voice sharp now. "You sound like you're protecting them." "I'm not." "Then help me fight," she said fiercely. "Help me save it." Alexander rose to his feet, torn between two impossible truths. He could save the center. One phone call, one signature. But the moment he did, she'd know everything, and he'd lose her. "I can't," he whispered. Emma stepped back like he'd struck her. "What?" "I'm sorry, Emma, I can't." "Can't or won't?" He said nothing. Emma's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of betrayal. "I thought I knew you," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought you were different. But you're just like everyone else. You talk about caring, but when it matters, when people need you, you disappear." "Emma, please, don't." She held up a hand. "Just don't." She turned and walked into her building, and Alexander stood alone on the empty street, the weight of his lie crushing him from the inside out. And that's when everything began to fall apart. Alexander didn't sleep that night. He sat in his rented room, staring at the ceiling, Emma's words echoing like gunfire in his mind. "You're just like everyone else." She was wrong, and she was right. Because the truth was worse than she knew. He wasn't just a bystander refusing to help. He was the reason the center was being destroyed. His signature, his company, his greed, wrapped in corporate efficiency and quarterly projections. At 3 a.m., he made the call. "Marcus, kill the Garrison project." His lawyer sputtered. "What?" "Alex, that's a $40 million development. The permits are approved, demolition is scheduled. I don't care, kill it." "The board will lose their minds. You can't just—" "I'm the majority shareholder," Alexander said coldly. "I can do whatever I want. Stop the demolition, transfer the property to a non-profit trust, make it untouchable." A long pause. "Alex, what's going on with you? Just do it." He hung up. It was done. The center was saved. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a band-aid on a bullet wound. The next morning, Alexander went to the cafe, but Emma wasn't there. Or the day after. Or the day after that. By the fourth day, Rosie looked at him with pity. "She's not coming, hun. She asked me to tell you. She needs space." Alexander nodded numbly and left. He walked to the community center, stood across the street, and watched through the window as Emma worked with the kids, painting, laughing, pretending everything was fine. But he could see the sadness in the set of her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. He'd hurt her. And she didn't even know the worst of it yet. A week passed, then another. Alexander existed in a fog, going through motions, haunting places they used to go together, feeling the absence of her like a physical ache. His phone buzzed constantly, the board demanding his return. Investors growing nervous, deals stalling without his signature. He ignored all of it. What was the point of an empire if the only person who made him feel human wanted nothing to do with him? It was Rosie who finally cornered him. "You love her," she said bluntly one morning, pouring his coffee without asking. Alexander looked up, startled. "What?" "Emma. You love her. Don't even try to deny it. I've been running this cafe for 30 years. I know what love looks like." He said nothing. Rosie sighed, sitting down across from him. "So, what's stopping you?" "It's complicated. Love always is." She studied him with sharp, knowing eyes. "But here's what I know about that girl. She doesn't care about money, status, or any of that nonsense. She cares about truth, loyalty, someone showing up when it matters." "I tried to show up," Alexander said quietly. "She pushed me away." "Because you held back," Rosie said. She could feel it. Women like Emma, they have a sixth sense for walls. And honey, you've got walls tall enough to block out the sun. Alexander's jaw tightened. "You don't understand?" "Then help me understand. What are you so afraid of?" He looked away. "That if she knew who I really am, she'd hate me. And if she never knows? If you just walk away?" Rosie leaned forward. "You'll spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been. Is that really better?" That afternoon, Alexander made a decision. He would tell her. All of it. He'd lay everything bare, the lies, the company, the man behind the mask, and let her decide if he was worth forgiving. He bought flowers from a street vendor, simple daisies, the kind Emma liked, and walked to her building. But when he arrived, he found her sitting on the front steps, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. He dropped the flowers and ran to her. "Emma!" She looked up, and the devastation in her eyes stopped him cold. "My mom," she whispered. She collapsed. They took her back to the hospital. They're saying, it's her heart this time, Alex. It's bad." Alexander's chest constricted. I'll take you, come on. No. Emma stood, wiping her eyes. I can't do this with you right now. Emma, please. You weren't there. The words burst out of her like a dam breaking. When I needed help saving the center, you disappeared. You said you couldn't help, you just gave up. And now you show up with flowers like that makes it okay? I did help, Alexander said desperately. The center, it's saved. The sale fell through. The building is safe. Emma froze. What? I made sure of it. I couldn't tell you before, but how? Her eyes narrowed. How could you possibly have done that? And there it was, the moment of truth. Alexander opened his mouth, the confession right there on his tongue. But then Emma's phone rang. She answered, her face going white. I'm coming right now. She looked at Alexander, tears streaming down her face. I have to go. Let me come with you. No! She stepped back. I don't know who you are, Alex. I thought I did, but I don't. And I can't deal with this right now. I just can't. She turned and ran. Alexander stood frozen, watching her disappear around the corner. He followed her to the hospital anyway, stayed in the waiting room for hours, keeping his distance but unable to leave. At midnight, a doctor came out and spoke to Emma. Alexander couldn't hear the words, but he saw Emma's face crumble. She collapsed into a chair, and the sound of her crying echoed through the sterile hallway. Alexander started toward her, but then a man appeared, tall, well-dressed, familiar in a way that made Alexander's stomach sink. Daniel Morrison, a venture capitalist Alexander had dealt with before, ruthless, connected, and apparently someone Emma knew. Daniel sat beside Emma, put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, exhausted, broken, desperate for comfort. Alexander's heart splintered. Who is he? As if sensing the question, Daniel looked up, and their eyes met across the waiting room. Recognition flashed in Daniel's face. Then shock. Then something worse. Amusement. He whispered something to Emma. Emma's head snapped up. She turned, saw Alexander, and the look on her face was pure confusion. Daniel stood, walked over, and extended his hand with a cold smile. Alexander Harrington, he said loudly enough for Emma to hear. Didn't expect to see the infamous billionaire CEO slumming it on this side of town. What brings you here? Charity work? The world stopped. Emma stood slowly, her eyes locked on Alexander. What did he just call you? She whispered. Alexander's mouth went dry. Emma. Alexander Harrington. Her voice rose. The CEO. The billionaire. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The truth was written all over his face. Emma's expression shifted through a dozen emotions: confusion, realization, betrayal, rage. You lied to me, she breathed. This whole time, everything you said, everything we were, it was all a lie. No, you're the reason they tried to tear down the center. Her voice broke. Your company, Harrington Global, I read about them, about you. I stopped it because you felt guilty, Emma shouted, tears streaming down her face. Not because you cared. Because you got caught up in your own sick experiment. What was I, Alex? A project, a way to feel better about yourself? Emma, please, it wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She demanded. Explain it to me. Explain why a billionaire pretended to be poor. Explain why you lied to my face every single day. Alexander reached for her. Because I needed to know if someone could love me for who I am, not what I have. Emma stepped back like he'd slapped her. You didn't give me that choice, she said. her voice cold now. "You manipulated me, used me, made me believe you were someone you're not." "I am that person." "No, you're not." Emma's voice echoed through the hallway. "That person doesn't exist. He was just a mask, and I fell in love with a ghost." The words hung in the air. I fell in love with a ghost. Alexander's heart shattered. "Emma, don't," she whispered. "Just don't. I can't even look at you right now." She turned and walked away back toward Daniel, who wrapped an arm around her shoulders, protective, possessive. And Alexander stood alone in the fluorescent light, watching the only real thing he'd ever had walk out of his life. Because some betrayals are too deep to forgive, or so it seemed. Alexander returned to his penthouse that night, 57 floors above a city that no longer felt like his. The marble floors gleamed. The designer furniture sat perfectly arranged. Everything exactly as he'd left it. Cold, empty, lifeless. He stood at the window, the same window where this had all begun, and felt the weight of his own reflection staring back at him. What have I done? His phone buzzed. His assistant. "Welcome back, sir. The board is relieved. Morning meeting at 8. He didn't respond. Instead, he sank onto the leather couch and let the silence swallow him whole. The next 3 weeks were a blur of self-destruction, disguised as productivity. Alexander threw himself back into work with mechanical precision. Meetings, negotiations, signatures on documents that moved millions. But none of it mattered. He'd close a deal and feel nothing. Approve a project and feel nothing. Stand in rooms full of people and feel completely alone. His board noticed. "Alex, are you all right?" his CFO asked after one particularly lifeless presentation. "You seem distant." Distant. That was one word for it. "I'm fine," Alexander lied. But he wasn't fine. He'd wake up at 3 a.m., reaching for a phone that didn't ring. He'd catch himself looking for her in coffee shops, on street corners, in crowds of strangers. He wore the green scarf she'd knitted until his assistant gently suggested he looked unprofessional. He fired the assistant the next day. One evening, Marcus found him in his office at midnight, staring at nothing. "You look like hell," Marcus said bluntly. "Thank you for the observation. I'm serious, Alex." Marcus sat down across from him. "You've been back 3 weeks and you're a ghost. What happened out there?" Alexander said nothing. "Does this have to do with the community center? The property transfer?" Marcus leaned forward. "You gave away a $40 million asset. No explanation, no strategy. That's not like you. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think." Marcus studied him. "This is about a woman, isn't it?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Jesus," Marcus breathed. "It is. You fell in love with someone while you were pretending to be broke." "I wasn't pretending," Alexander said quietly. "For the first time in my life, I was real." "And she found out the truth." Alexander closed his eyes. "She found out I lied. So fix it." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because she was right," Alexander said, his voice raw. "I manipulated her, used her. She trusted me, and I betrayed that trust. There's no coming back from that." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My father once told me something. He said the measure of a man isn't whether he makes mistakes, it's what he does after." Alexander looked up. "You made a mistake, Alex. A big one. But hiding in this tower, drowning in guilt, that's not fixing anything, that's just cowardice. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He got dressed and drove, not in his Aston Martin, but in the old Honda he'd bought during his weeks as Alex. He drove to Emma's neighborhood, parked across from her building, and waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for: permission, forgiveness, a sign. At 7 a.m., Emma emerged. She looked thinner, tired. The light in her eyes had dimmed, but she was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. She walked to the bus stop, and Alexander's hands gripped the steering wheel. Go to her, tell her, fight for her. But fear paralyzed him. The bus came. Emma got on, and Alexander sat in his car like a coward, watching her leave. He went to Rosie's cafe, ordered black coffee, and sat by the window where he and Emma used to talk. Rosie brought the coffee herself. "She comes in sometimes," Rosie said quietly. "Not as often, but she comes." Alexander looked up. "How is she?" "Sad." Rosie sat down. "Her mama died 2 weeks ago." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What?" "Heart failure. Emma was with her at the end." Rosie's eyes were gentle. "That boy Daniel has been helping her with arrangements. He's been attentive." Alexander's chest felt like it was caving in. Grace was gone. Emma had lost her mother, the person she loved most in the world, and he hadn't been there. He'd been hiding in his tower, drowning in his own guilt, while she suffered alone. "I need to see her," he said hoarsely. "Then stop talking about it and do it," Rosie said firmly. "But don't go to her with excuses. Go to her with truth, real truth, the kind that costs something." Alexander went to the community center. He stood outside, watching through the window as Emma worked with the kids, teaching, laughing, pretending everything was okay. But he could see the cracks now, the way she moved a little slower, the way her smile took effort. A little girl, Lily, ran up to her with a painting. Emma knelt down, examined it carefully, and said something that made Lily beam. Alexander's heart broke all over again. She's still giving, still loving, still showing up. Even in her pain, Emma was more whole than he'd ever been. He tried to leave, tried to convince himself she was better off without him. But then he saw it. Daniel Morrison entering the center, walking straight to Emma, putting his hand on her shoulder with easy familiarity. Emma smiled at him, not the smile she'd given Alexander, but a smile nonetheless. Daniel said something. Emma nodded, and then Daniel leaned in and kissed her cheek. Alexander's world tilted. He turned and walked away, his lungs too tight, his vision blurring. She's moved on, she's better off, let her go. But he couldn't, because he'd finally understood something fundamental. He hadn't fallen in love with Emma because she was kind, or simple, or beautiful. He'd fallen in love with her because she'd made him want to be better, not richer, not more powerful, better. And if he walked away now, if he let fear and guilt win, he'd be proving she was right about him. He'd be the ghost she accused him of being. That evening, Alexander did something he hadn't done in years. He called his mother. "Alexander." Her voice was surprised. They hadn't spoken in months. "Is everything all right?" "No," he said honestly. "I need advice." There was a pause, then softer. "Tell me." And he did. He told her everything, the experiment, the lies, Emma, the loss. When he finished, his mother was quiet for a long moment. "You know what your father's biggest regret was?" she finally said. Alexander frowned. "What?" "That he never told the people he loved that he loved them. He thought showing up, providing, building an empire, he thought that was enough. Her voice cracked, but it wasn't. And when he died alone, surrounded by people who respected him but didn't truly know him. Alexander's throat tightened. "Don't make his mistake, Alexander," his mother whispered. "If you love this woman, truly love her, then you fight. Not with money, not with power, with truth, with humility, with the courage to be vulnerable, even if she breaks your heart. What if it's too late? Then at least you'll know you tried. And that's more than your father could say." The next morning, Alexander stood outside Emma's building at dawn. He didn't have flowers, didn't have a plan, didn't have anything except the truth and a heart that wouldn't stop breaking. The door opened. Emma stepped out and froze when she saw him. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Alexander spoke, his voice raw and unguarded. "I know I have no right to be here. I know I hurt you. I know you probably hate me, and you should. But I need to say something, and if you walk away after, I'll understand. I'll leave you alone forever." Emma said nothing, but she didn't leave. Alexander took a breath. "You were right. I lied. I manipulated you. I used you to fill a hole in myself that I didn't know how to fill any other way, and I'm so sorry." His voice broke. "But Emma, you need to know. Everything I felt was real. Every conversation, every moment. When I was with you, I wasn't pretending to be someone else. I was finally becoming who I was supposed to be." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her expression remained guarded. "I don't expect forgiveness," Alexander continued. "I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know you changed me. You made me believe that love, real love, was possible. And even if I never see you again, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you made me want to become." He stepped back. "I'm sorry about your mother. I should have been there. I'm sorry for everything." He turned to leave. "Wait." Emma's voice stopped him cold. He turned back. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why show up now?" "Because I finally understood," Alexander said softly, "that loving you means being brave enough to lose you." And for the first time, hope flickered in the darkness. Emma stared at him, tears streaming down her face, her expression a battlefield of emotions. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she whispered. "I know," Alexander said. "And I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I've changed. Not with money, not with grand gestures. Just with time and truth." Emma wiped her eyes. "My mother died thinking I'd found someone good, someone real. Do you know what that's like? To lose someone while living a lie?" The words cut deeper than any blade. "No," Alexander said quietly. "But I know what it's like to lose the only person who ever made me feel real." Emma looked away, her jaw trembling. "I can't do this right now," she said. "I can't. I need time." "Take all the time you need," Alexander said. "I'll be here. Don't make promises you can't keep." "I'm not." He met her eyes. "I'll be here, Emma, every day until you tell me to stop." And he was. The next morning, Alexander showed up at the community center. Not to talk to Emma, not to force anything. He just showed up. He asked the director, a woman named Paula, if they needed help. Paula looked him up and down skeptically. "You know this is volunteer work, right? No pay." "I know. We need someone to repaint the west wall. It's manual labor. Hard work. I'll do it." Paula raised an eyebrow. "You sure? You don't exactly look like the manual labor type. Alexander thought of the boy who used to help his father on construction sites before the empire was born, before the suits and the boardrooms. "I'm sure," he said. For the next 2 weeks, Alexander showed up every morning at 7 a.m. He painted walls, fixed broken chairs, unclogged sinks, organized supply closets. He worked alongside volunteers, college students, retirees, people who had nothing but gave everything. And Emma watched. She didn't speak to him, didn't acknowledge him. But she watched. On the 8th day, Lily ran up to him with a paintbrush. "Mr. Alex, will you help me with my painting?" Alexander glanced at Emma, who stood across the room, her expression unreadable. "If that's okay with Miss Emma," he said quietly. Emma hesitated, then nodded once. Lily grabbed his hand and pulled him to the art table. "I'm painting my family," Lily explained, "but I don't know how to paint sadness." Alexander knelt beside her. "What do you mean?" "My daddy left," Lily said matter-of-factly, "and my mama cries a lot. How do I paint that without making it ugly?" Alexander's chest tightened. He thought about his own father, about absence and loss and the weight of things unsaid. "You paint the love that's still there," he said softly. "Even when people leave, the love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape." Lily considered this seriously. Then she picked up a yellow brush and painted a bright sun above 2 figures holding hands. "Like this?" she asked. "Exactly like that." That afternoon, as Alexander was cleaning brushes, Emma approached him. "That was kind," she said quietly. "What you said to Lily." It was the first time she'd spoken to him in 2 weeks. Alexander looked up. "I meant it." Emma studied him, something shifting in her expression. "Why are you really here, Alexander?" "Because this place matters," he said simply, "and because I want to be part of something that matters." "You could write a check, donate millions, fix everything with money." "I already did that," Alexander said. "It didn't change anything. This," he gestured around the center, "this is different." "How?" "Because I'm not buying anything. I'm just showing up." Emma's eyes softened, just slightly. "My mother used to say that love isn't what you feel, it's what you do." Alexander nodded. She was right. On the 15th day, Paula pulled Alexander aside. "I don't know what your story is," she said, "and I don't need to, but Emma's been through hell. Her mom, the lies, all of it. So if you're just here to make yourself feel better—" "I'm not," Alexander interrupted gently. "Then what are you here for?" "To be better," he said. "Not for her, for me." Paula studied him, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but hurt her again, and I don't care how much money you have, I'll make sure you regret it." Alexander smiled faintly. "Fair enough." That evening, as volunteers were leaving, Emma found him in the supply closet, organizing donated art materials. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know." "Then why?" Alexander turned to face her. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm doing something that isn't about profit or power or image. I'm doing something because it's right. And I have you to thank for that." Emma leaned against the doorframe. "I'm still angry at you." "You should be." "I don't know if I can forgive you." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Alexander said. "I'm asking for the chance to become someone worthy of it." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Daniel asked me to dinner tomorrow," she said softly. Alexander's heart clenched, but he kept his face neutral. "Are you going?" I don't know. She looked at him. Should I? I can't answer that for you, Emma. But I can tell you this. You deserve someone who sees you, really sees you. Someone who doesn't hide. Someone brave enough to love you honestly. And you think you're that person? I want to be, Alexander said. But I know I have to earn it. Emma's eyes glistened. You hurt me, Alexander. You made me doubt everything. I know, and I'll spend every day proving I'm not that person anymore. She nodded slowly, then turned to leave. Emma, Alexander called softly. She paused. Whatever you decide about Daniel, about me, about anything, I'll respect it. But I need you to know, I love you. Not the version of you I thought I wanted. The real you. The one who fights for broken kids and knits scarves and sees beauty in ordinary things. That's who I fell in love with. And that's who I'll love even if you never speak to me again. Emma's breath caught. She didn't respond. She just walked away, leaving Alexander alone in the dim light of the supply closet, his heart laid bare. The next day, Alexander didn't go to the center. He gave her space, let her breathe, let her choose. He went to his mother's house instead, the one place he'd avoided for years. She opened the door, surprise flickering across her face. Alexander, can I come in? They sat in the kitchen where he'd grown up, drinking tea in comfortable silence. You look different, his mother finally said. I feel different. Is it her? Alexander nodded. She makes me want to be the man Dad never was. His mother's eyes filled with tears. Your father would be proud. Not of the empire, of this. I don't know if she'll forgive me. Then you show her every day that you're worthy of forgiveness. Not with words, with actions. Alexander thought of Lily's painting, the sun above two figures holding hands. Love that doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. That evening, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I didn't have dinner with Daniel. I'm not ready to move on. But I'm not ready to forgive either. Meet me at Rosie's tomorrow. 8 a.m. We need to talk. Alexander stared at the message, his heart pounding. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door left open. And for the first time in weeks, Alexander felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Because sometimes love isn't about grand declarations. It's about showing up again and again until trust is rebuilt, one quiet moment at a time. Alexander arrived at Rosie's at 7:45 a.m. He sat by the window, their window, and waited, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. At exactly 8 a.m., Emma walked through the door. She wore the same faded yellow sweater from the day they'd met. Her hair was pulled back in that messy bun that made his heart ache. She looked tired, but there was something different in her eyes, a clarity that hadn't been there before. She sat down across from him without a word. Rosie brought her chamomile tea without asking. For a long moment, they just sat in silence. The comfortable kind, the kind that spoke of shared history and mutual understanding. Finally, Emma spoke. I've been thinking a lot about what my mother said before she died. Alexander's chest tightened. What did she say? She said that everyone wears masks. Some people just have more expensive ones. Emma's eyes met his. She told me that the measure of a person isn't whether they lie. It's whether they have the courage to tell the truth when it costs them everything. Alexander swallowed hard. She also said, Emma's voice softened, that she'd never seen anyone look at me the way you did in that hospital, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. You were, Alexander whispered. You are. Emma looked down at her tea. I can't just forget what happened, Alexander. I can't pretend it didn't hurt. I'm not asking you to. But I also can't pretend I don't feel something for you, even after everything. She looked up, tears in her eyes. And that terrifies me. Alexander reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand covered hers, gentle, reverent. I spent my whole life building walls, he said quietly, protecting myself, measuring everything by profit and loss. And then I met you. And for the first time, I felt something I couldn't calculate or control. Something real. Emma's fingers curled slightly against his palm. I'm not asking for everything right now, Alexander continued. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that the man you met, the one who sat in this cafe and talked about books and dreams, that man is real. He was buried under years of armor, but you found him. You brought him back to life. And Alexander Harrington? Emma asked softly. The billionaire CEO? He's learning how to be human again, Alexander said, with your help, if you'll let him. Emma was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I need you to understand something. I don't want your money. I don't want your empire. I don't want a life of galas and penthouses and people who smile at me because of your bank account. I know. If we do this, if I give you this chance, I need you as Alex, the man who painted with children, the man who held my hand in a hospital waiting room, the man who wore my imperfect scarf like it was made of gold. Alexander's throat tightened. That's all I want to be. Can you? Emma challenged gently. Can you be that person in your world? I don't want my world anymore, Alexander said. I want yours. I want morning tea and community centers and conversations that matter. I want to be the kind of man who shows up not because he has to, but because he chooses to. Emma studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled, the first real smile he'd seen in weeks. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Okay, she repeated, stronger now. We start over. Slowly. Honestly. No more masks. Alexander felt his chest expand with something that felt dangerously close to joy. No more masks, he agreed. 6 months later. The community center had been renovated, not with cold corporate efficiency, but with heart. New paint, donated by local businesses, murals designed by the kids themselves, a garden in the back where Emma taught children how to grow vegetables. Alexander had stepped back from his CEO role, delegating to people he trusted while he focused on what he'd started calling work that matters. He'd created a foundation, Emma's foundation, though she'd rolled her eyes at the name, that funded arts programs, community centers, and educational initiatives in underserved neighborhoods. But his favorite work was still the simplest. Every Tuesday and Thursday he showed up at the center and taught basic carpentry to teenagers who needed job skills and someone who believed in them. Emma worked beside him, teaching art, organizing events, being the heart of a community that loved her fiercely. They took things slow. Coffee dates at Rosie's, walks through the neighborhood, dinners at Emma's small apartment where they cooked together and talked about everything and nothing. Alexander had sold the penthouse. He now lived in a modest loft 3 blocks from Emma, close enough to walk, far enough to respect her independence. His board thought he'd lost his mind. His mother thought he'd finally found himself. Alexander knew they were both right. One evening, as they walked home from the center, Emma slipped her hand into his. I have something to tell you, she said. Alexander's heart skipped. What? Lily asked me today if you were my boyfriend. Emma smiled. I didn't know what to say. What did you want to say? Emma stopped walking and turned to face him. The streetlight caught her face, making her glow like something holy. I wanted to say yes, she whispered, but I wasn't sure if we'd ever actually defined what this is. Alexander cupped her face gently. What do you want this to be? Something real, Emma said. Something lasting. Something that survives both the good days and the terrible ones. Then that's what we'll build, Alexander said. One day at a time. Emma rose on her toes and kissed him, soft, sweet, full of promise. And for the first time in his life, Alexander understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. A year later, on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain and new beginnings, Alexander knelt on one knee in the community center, surrounded by children, volunteers, and Emma's entire world. The ring was simple, no diamonds, just a silver band with an inscription inside. You found me. I'm not perfect, Alexander said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I'll probably mess up again. Say the wrong thing. Forget important dates, but I promise you this, I will show up every day in all the ways that matter. I will love you honestly, bravely, and without masks. Will you marry me? Emma's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. The center erupted in cheers. Lily jumped up and down. Rosie wiped her eyes. Paula laughed and cried at the same time. And Alexander Harrington, the man who'd once thought he needed billions to matter, held the woman who taught him that love was the only currency that truly counted. 5 years later, Alexander stood in the garden behind the center, watching Emma teach their 3-year-old daughter how to plant tomatoes. Gently, sweetheart, Emma said, guiding small hands. We have to be gentle with growing things. Their daughter, Grace, named after the grandmother she'd never met, patted the soil carefully, her face serious with concentration. Alexander's phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. The Singapore investors are waiting for your call. He silenced it. Some things were more important than empires. Emma looked up, caught his eye and smiled, that same smile that had changed everything years ago in a small cafe. He walked over, knelt beside them, and helped his daughter plant seeds that would grow into something beautiful. Daddy, Grace said, holding up dirt-covered hands. Look, I'm helping things grow. Alexander kissed her forehead. You are, sweetheart, just like your mama. Emma leaned against his shoulder, and they sat there in the quiet evening light, a family built not on wealth or status, but on truth, presence, and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. The rain began to fall, gentle, cleansing, full of promise, just like the day they'd met, just like every day since. He thought it was just one meeting, but it became the beginning of everything. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us that love can change everything. Because sometimes, the richest person in the world is the one who learns that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in moments that matter,